Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. On the podcast, I seek out and interview entrepreneurs, leading business people, authors, tech leaders, academics, and generally cool people doing interesting stuff in the service and experience space. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough for me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Mark Abraham and David Edelman. Now, Mark is a senior partner at BCG and the founder of the firm's personalization business. We'll learn more about that in a minute. And David, 3 decades worth of history in personalization. And we bow down to that. We're looking forward to learning from that. But he's also a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School, an executive advisor, board member to brands and technology providers, and also, here's the connection, an advisor to BCG. Welcome, Mark. Welcome, David, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Now, I did a bit of an intro. Now I'm going to throw it back onto you folks, if that's okay, for the benefit of our listeners who might not be familiar with you and also the work that you do and some of these esteemed organizations that I've mentioned and these decades worth of experience. So, Mark, can you starting with you, if I may? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
So it's been a fun journey over the last decade building the personalization business at BCG. It actually started with when we helped build Starbucks' personalization capability about a decade ago. And at the time, we reinvented what consulting meant. We brought together AI engineers and data scientists and MarTech experts with our change consultants and really help brands deliver personalization. Since then, we've found the same formula works across not just retail, but travel and financial services and healthcare and a bunch of other industries. And so I get to travel the world and help brands deliver better customer experiences.
Awesome. David, follow that, if you will, sir.
Yeah, sure. I'm a bit older than Mark, so I started about 30 years ago as a young consultant with BCG when companies were just starting to see the value of customer information, working with Citicorp on what it meant to run the loyalty programs for grocery retailers and for Time Inc. magazines, which doesn't even exist now, on being able to do selective binding of advertising. So this was before the internet, came up with the concept we called segment of one marketing. And I've been working in the personalization area ever since as the capabilities advanced, be it the internet, data management capabilities, content management capabilities, and now AI. I've been in consulting. I've been on the agency side. I was part of the team that started Digitas. I was also chief marketing officer at Aetna, where I brought a lot of this to bear to change how a company could help people in managing their health. And now, besides teaching, I advise companies. I work both with smaller startups, so I get firsthand sense of what's going on in the AI world, and larger companies, helping them figure out how to really get the value and implement them. So it's been all about personalization, and now you can do it at scale. So it seemed like a good time to write a book, and Mark was a great partner to do it with.
Well, you said they're going to make the book, and that's going to exactly what I wanted to say. Is that, first of all, congratulations on you've recently published a book called Personalized, in big caps, I should hasten to add. Personalized, yes. And then the customer strategy in the age of AI. So yes, congratulations on that. And can you tell me, I wanted to ask, just give people like a helicopter view of it. Tell me a little bit about it and what's its main sort of thesis and who's it for?
So,
Mark, yes, sir.
Yeah. Personalized, we're very excited, first of all, to share it with the world. It's been a labor of love. And the core premise is that we think that there's been too much discussion about AI driving efficiency. Mm-hmm. And we need to flip the conversation to using AI to driving growth. And in the book, we did a whole bunch of research on this, hundreds of brands, and quantified what personalization really means and where companies stand. And what we found is it's the best way to drive growth with AI. We filled the book with lots of stories, in-depth guidance from brands that are doing this well. and tried to distill a playbook for how to really improve your personalization journey.
And is it so? I know that personalization is this big thing, right? And it's a multi-dimensional sort of thing, and it's about data, and it's about sort of marketing capability, and it's about technology. I mean, so who's it for? Is it for the technologists, the data scientists, the marketeers, all of the above? Leadership? We need to understand this to make decisions about it. Again, who's it for?
It's for the leadership of the
Okay.
company, because one of the key premises of the book is that personalization is not just a marketing tactic.
Mhm.
It's really a strategy for using customer information to enhance the value proposition you're providing to customers.
Right.
You're actually changing their experience in a way that they see drives value. You're thinking about empowering them to do things. Doing that requires a lot more than just marketing tactics. It
Mhm.
requires redesigning processes, possibly services, a lot of the organization working together. And we have a chapter in the book on the roles of the different parties across the C-suite.
Mhm.
So it's really a fundamental strategic angle. And the companies who are leading in it take that very seriously from the top.
Okay. I mean, so I wanted to dive into the book, if I may, just a little bit to give people a flavor of the book, because, we don't want to tell people everything about the book, because obviously you want people to buy the book. That's just kind of part of it. But early in the book, and Mark, I'll come to you on this, if I may, is that you write there is no widely accepted definition of personalization, because it's this big word, it's thrown around. We talked about it for years. So let's rectify that, shall we? Let's do it here and now. Let's kind of provide us with a definition of kind of personalization.
Yeah, that's one of the things we set out to do with this book, because I can't tell you how many clients we start the discussion with, what is even personalization? There's, even within the same organization, different definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's not just putting your name in an email or giving you an, if you bought this, then buy that recommendation. No, companies are now able to take what they learned about you specifically in an interaction with you and make your next interaction, which could be very quickly thereafter, better, faster, more convenient, or better value. And that's what personalization at its heart is, which means using data at scale and actually having the speed and the processes to turn around and use those insights.
But I think you also you mentioned a word there I think is key. You talked about better value. And I think the important part is like, it's not just value to the company, it's also value to the customer, right? And too often I see people get caught up in this thing about personalization. It's like, it's an advanced tactic to sell more stuff. Hey, brilliant. But actually, we're talking about relationships here, right? And actually, you build relationships by being valuable to the other party. And over time, if you keep doing that, I believe, then more value in currency terms will occur. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And we actually did a study, which we based on what we call the personalization index, where we looked at how companies were both building capabilities to enable personalization and what they were actually delivering in terms of customer experiences, playing, in fact, secret shopper sometimes to actually see and measure those experiences, and then correlating that with their financials. And what we saw was that the leaders who were building the capabilities and delivering were achieving as much as 10 points higher growth rates than the laggards in their same category.
Right.
So they were actually seeing higher financial performance. Often it was coming from greater share within your customer base of people doing more business with you, lower attrition rates, often also things like lower cost to serve because people were smarter. Just give you an example of this. When I was chief marketing officer at Aetna, people don't understand their health insurance. They just don't. And so we found a supplier called Sunday Sky who could do personalized videos. And we offered people, when they became new members, a personalized video to explain their health insurance, what they bought for their family. And that was a home run. And it allowed us to explain to people what they had. It cut calls to the call center by over 20%. Satisfaction went up. So it was using data to actually help people.
Yeah.
And that drives a virtuous cycle, because then as they do more business with you, you get more data. And you can use that to drive even better value delivery.
I should just say, big shout out to Jim Dixo at Sunday Sky, because he is an alumnus or alumni, like alumni, yes, because there's only one of them, of the podcast. I spoke to him years ago about some of the cool stuff that they were doing with smart video, compiling videos in real time to, there was that, I think the headline case study that they were using at the time that we featured on was how they were helping AT&T deal with bill shock in the telecoms industry. And it was just like, had some phenomenal results. They were doing some crazy stuff with that, which is it's tremendous. Anybody that doesn't know about Sunday Sky One should check out that podcast in the archive. It's Jim Dixo at Sunday Sky, and that's spelled DICSO. Right. And smart video, because they've just kept building on the capabilities there. So they do some wonderful things. But I think the other thing I would also kind of like say, I mean, this is the bit that also the thing in the book is you talk about challenging people's view of kind of personalization. I mean, maybe Mark, maybe I come to you and ask you, so for all those firms and executives that say that they're really doing personalization, because you hear it like, we're doing that. Yeah, we're doing that. It's great. What would you say to them?
Well, this is exactly why we wanted to finally create a way to measure personalization, because that's what I found in all our work is there's not really a great way to measure personalization. And so most companies are on this journey, or they are personalizing some parts of their experience. And I think there's a lot of complacency on we're already doing this. The truth is, when we actually scored these brands, the highest scores were 80 to 85 out of 100.
Right.
Of all the brands. And the average score is 49. So most brands have a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of parts to this. There are many channels. There are many steps in the customer experience. Now, not all are equally important to personalize, but we consistently find even the advanced brands on this, it's really hard to do the cross-channel, cross-functional pieces of this because it requires new ways of working, technology integration, and automation. And that's where organizations have a hard time despite the massive investments.
Yeah, and I think for me, I always find, and maybe this is, it would be nice to get your take on this. I always find that when I speak to brands and they say that they've got an experience vision and strategy, and then it's tied to their kind of, their commercial outcomes and their business objectives. But when you really probe that, they don't really. I mean, it's this kind of high level sort of thing, and they don't really have this granular view of what it means across different parts of the journey for different types of kind of customers, and what that human and tech kind of balance is like across that kind of piece. And because they haven't done that, then they don't really understand what their technology needs to be like and what they need to build to in order to deliver that. And so, and I think that's the kind of feels to me that's a bit like their Achilles heel. They tell themselves they've got this, but when you dig into it, you end up with this bitty sort of like stuff. And is that fair?
There's also, yes. And there's also just a lot of inertia. There are just programs that are just set and going. So let me give you an example. I recently moved my home from the suburbs of Massachusetts into Cambridge. And one of the major home improvement retailers clearly got my name on a list, started bombarding me with emails about all kinds of things now that I've moved into a new home. But then they actually asked me, what is the priority project that you want to do? And I said, kitchen renovation. And that was over a month ago. I haven't gotten anything about kitchen renovation from them. In fact, today they sent me something. We have new lawn fertilizers. I have never bought anything for my yard or lawn from them. So it sounds like they're trying, but it's very hard to break the momentum of the programs that they're running, to actually step back, hit reset, set priorities for what they want to use information for, And this was a clear example where it seemed like they were trying, but the momentum just took them away.
And it's fascinating because actually when you almost like, you're like, oh, there's this. What's your priority? You're like, oh, and you go,
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. I'll give you that piece of information because that's going to be useful to me. And then it's like, wah, wah, wah. And then all of a sudden you're a bit like, oh dear. And I don't think people necessarily take into account how failing to live up to those expectations that you've been a party to setting can actually be the thing that loses you the business, because then if somebody else shows up and then takes their place and it's boff, then you're off to the races, right? That's a fascinating thing. But I also wanted to kind of like to dig into, because I love a bit of an equation, and I know you've got an equation in the book, and there's an equation which goes P equals N times V squared. And I'm like, oh, that could be a whole slideshow on its own, right? So who wants to have a go at explaining what that
Mark,
means?
take this one.
I love equations, so that was my brainchild. But we really wanted to capture the essence of a book in a simple way. And what it gets at is companies should now be competing on the scale of their digital customer relationships and insights they have about us. So that's the N, the number of these digital customer relationships they have. And then the speed with which they're able to act on them. So that's the V. And that actually has an exponential impact on this. So to give you an example that is we very often find in our work, we recently worked with one of the major banks in the US, and they had lots of personalization. They had set up several hundred triggered campaigns that were running to catch signals from clients and act on them. But when it came to launching an actual personalized campaign, it was a 16-week process. We mapped it, and there were 15 teams involved. There were 18 handoffs. There were 40 people touching it. And they had no V. The speed was missing. Even if they had all this data and they had invested massively in the signals and they had millions of digital customer relationships, it just took too long to take that data into effect. Like David mentioned, that missing that signal, even when the customer is giving it. So with just more agile processes, by shrinking the number of people, redesigning the process with less handoffs, investing in some automation at key points in the campaign creation process, including some Gen AI tools, we cut that down to 3 days. So 16 weeks to 3 days. And the results are enormous in terms of engagement rates, opt-in rates for their campaigns. So really zeroing in on that speed aspect, what we call bringing the organizational intelligence to the artificial intelligence, is really, really critical.
Just the other aspect of speed is your ability to test and learn, because often in personalization, you don't know what's going to work.
Yeah.
You don't know specifically for Adrian what is going to be the right way to frame it, the creative, the offer, all of that. And so you've got to test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. And that was a big part of what, for example, I did at Aetna, was get an engine going to constantly be driving new tests going out in market. Because the more you can test and learn, the more data you can get back that can help you refine the granularity by which you can do personalization. And so having the speed to be able to get more tests in builds your information advantage that much faster.
Yeah.
And we certainly found that was the case, as we, similar to Mark, cut down something that was 6 weeks into, less, getting campaigns out the door within 2 weeks, which in a healthcare company with compliance is a lot. But getting like 5 out every 2 weeks made a huge difference in the quality of what we could do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can talk about experimentation on testing and learning and things, but sometimes people limit it to certain teams, as it were. But actually, there really needs to be part of a culture, as it were. And I think David, one of your colleagues that have also had on the podcast, I think it's Stefan Tomke, who wrote a book called Experimentation Works, I think, or Experimentation Matters. Well, there's 2 of them. I can't remember which one came second. But I had him on the podcast, and he was talking about how it's not just about, it's about democratizing. the experimentation and building a culture to support that. Because, to quote Peter Senge from back in the day, we have to create a learning organization because that's our competitive advantage, right? It's not just about the data analytics, it's about building our capability to be able to act on all of those sort of things. But the thing I wanted to weave back into is that and David, I'll come back to you on this, is that there's, because I know there was a failed promise in the kind of like, I want the kind of kitchen renovation, and nobody lived up to it, because I know the books talks about these 5 promises of personalization as well. I mean, I wanted to ask you to help me understand what those things kind of are, because I think it's a promise, right? It's like, it's not a transaction, it's a set of promises that you make to people.
Yeah, so we talk about the 5 promises of personalization, which are implicitly what a brand is offering to a customer when they're starting to embark on a personalization journey, when they're sharing information back and forth. So the 5 promises, pretty straightforward. The first, which is actually the most important, is empower me.
Mm-hmm.
Help the customer get something done that they could not do before easily, like understand their health insurance, as I mentioned earlier. Help you by using information that you have about them and showing them that they can get something done.
Right.
In order to do that, you need to have the second promise, which is know me. So you have to have permissioned customer information about somebody. Some of it captured during the act of doing transactions, that's first party data. Some of it can be by asking questions, like I mentioned that home improvement retailer did.
Sure.
That's 0-party data. They didn't exactly use it, but they seem to be trying.
Yes.
So know me. The third is reach me. So figure out when is the right time to touch somebody with a message, or to make it easier for them to reach you, as opposed to just bombarding them with stuff, which all too often is the case. And there's a big danger now with AI of creating lots and lots of spam that's going to turn people off and they're going to unsubscribe. So reach me is about orchestrating the timing and the channel of that contact. The fourth is show me. So provide me a simple, easy to understand way that I can get the message, the experience. And, we were talking about Sunday Sky, and personalized video is a great example of using AI capabilities now to actually benefit the customer by showing them. And then the last is what we've been talking about now, delight me, which is constantly improving what you're offering the customer as you interact more, as you test and learn, as they see that you're using the information to make their experience better. So it's thinking deliberately about all 5 of those that drives personalization. And the personalization index that I referenced earlier looks at a company's capabilities to do each of those 5, and then are they actually delivering on them? So that's what we use that framework, and we find that's a really useful structure for companies to have as they try to organize themselves to build the capabilities and start getting programs going.
No, I love that. There's 5 things, because it also feels like even if you didn't go into it in a lot of detail, it's almost a bit like a self-audit sort of thing, where you can turn around. Am I empowering them? Am I knowing them? Am I reaching them? Am I showing them things? And am I delighting them? And almost like rank yourself, be honest and rank yourself against this.
And it starts with empower me. It starts with how are you helping the customer, as we started this discussion. And by the way, the full personalization index is linked to these 5 promises and scoring yourself on every aspect.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that also kind of shows you start having an honest conversation and an assessment of kind of your capabilities, because I think it was NTT's global benchmarking report from a couple of years ago. And they showed up and they had this, I mean, it's a great data set. But the headlines of the report was that brands really valued personalization, as did customers. The problem is that customers felt like personalization wasn't living up to its promise and brands weren't listening to them. So they're like, They were like at cross purposes. They were like, yay, but then not actually kind of listening to each other. So it's like they didn't feel like they were being listened to, heard, and people weren't acknowledging kind of what they were saying to kind of like brands and then therefore acting on it. So the opportunity was there, it was just being missed, as it were. But a lot of that, Mark, has like technological implications. I mean,
That's right.
Apart from all the big strategy and clear thinking and so on and so forth, there are big technological implications of this. I mean, so what are the sort of technological elements that brands need to have in place in order to deliver this? And because, let's face it, it can be mind-boggling. I mean, if we only need to look at, I'm sure you're familiar with Scott Brinker's MarTech kind of landscapes, like,
yep, exactly. And it's constantly growing. So look, here's the bad news. There's not one silver bullet where you can install a piece of software and your personalization tech stack is solved. But what we do in the book is lay out a practical framework for the personalization engine, going through each of the steps and tips for avoiding some of the massive mistakes from years past. So start with thinking about the data. And this is where, I've been in so many discussions with clients that have big data roadmaps and investment plans over 3 years to call it integrate the customer data platform and solve it all. No, start with the use cases that you're really focusing on to empower the customer and build incrementally the data flows to enable that in a focused way where you're getting the payback to then self-fund the journey. The other concept we really stress is this idea of smart integration. Mm-hmm. You already have tools. Everyone has a legacy tech stack, and none of it is perfect, but you can leverage some of those components better and then selectively augment with automation critical pieces, going back to this idea of cutting down the speed with which you can learn and experiment. So, for example, if your teams are still pulling customer lists by hand and passing them to the vendor, and the integration between your marketing automation and your delivery platforms is not there in the critical channels, think about solving that one pain point and investing selectively there. So that's the kind of roadmap we really use with lots of examples to help leaders on their journey.
I mean, is it an idea then? Because I've heard people have a lot of success in this domain by having a target state architecture as almost like an aim point. Now, I stress that this is not a fixed destination. This is directionally accurate because things will change over the time. But actually, do you think that's wise? As yes, you can do these little things of improvements, but actually having a target sort of like state over time, is that a useful thing to aim for as well?
I think it's important to understand, just given, for example, the 5 promises and acknowledging that your architecture needs to cover all 5, that's a start. So you need componentry that can fit together to cover all 5. So from a target state, you should be thinking at that level.
Right.
The specific tools and how they work together, constantly changing.
Sure.
And especially given that some of the Gen AI tools now actually can do things like write the code to combine data sets that were not available before, where you had to do major data integration projects. Now there's tools, there's one called Narrative that can look at one database, look at a second, and then write the code to combine them. So there's more and more capabilities in the AI tools to do that. So you need an open mind. And these AI tools, because they can do things like write code, can actually be more compatible with existing legacy systems because they can write the code to address the APIs and the data exchange that they need.
Yeah.
So you got to experiment. You got to try a bunch of things and not just lock yourself in. I think it comes back to the experimentation point, Adrian, that you were raising before. I mean, it's experimentation in terms of learning what'll work in the market. It's also trying out different tools to see if they can meet your need to address those 5 promises.
Yeah.
One build on that, Bill, is the data architecture, I think, is what I would focus on first and foremost. And I think that sometimes these point solutions are great shortcuts to deliver a better customer experience in a specific use case or channel. but sometimes it results in trapped data.
Mhm.
So really making sure that, especially that engagement data, did the customer click, did they engage, did they actually transact, did they come back? That data has to flow back somewhere so you can capture it and use it in your AI and power other solutions. Because if you just leave it trapped in these endpoint solution tools, you're missing and a part of the customer experience, and that results in some of these issues that David shared on. Okay, the customer is telling me this, but then I have a separate email program that's doing this based
Sure.
on different data.
I mean, David also talked about the role of AI in this, and it's not. I mean, I guess AI has been the big story for the last kind of 2 years, and will continue to be as capability has just kind of built, and we've unleashed the maelstrom of generative AI on the world. I mean, so two questions, I guess. I mean, and David, I'll come to you on this, given that you opened the box on this. So, what role do you foresee AI kind of playing in this, and also what sort of AI are we talking about? Because let's get beyond kind of generative AI. Let's kind of be clear about kind of that. There's a lot of useful tools in the box, I believe.
Absolutely. Let's work backwards on your question, Adrian, in terms of the types of AI. So first, let's just focus. For Gen AI itself, we certainly have the capability to generate new kinds of content at scale, lots of variations, being able to create text, video, images, and certainly from an experience generation standpoint, being able to create something in the moment for someone can be very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But the other fact is Gen AI can write code.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets you into other areas that people aren't thinking as much about, like the code to be able to knit together systems, like the code to actually execute things and starting to do things like what's called agentic AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So being able to get something done for you. Uber, for example, is one of the classic examples of agentic AI. It's older, but it helps you order a car and it coordinates all the aspects of getting a car ordered. That's an agent capability.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's still machine learning. A lot of the predictive modeling and understanding how to analyze data is highly valuable. For example, one of the companies we cite in the book is called OfferFit, and they use old style but superpowered machine learning to help you create the test cells for large scale test and learn.
Right.
So being able to do multivariate testing, something you couldn't really do before. And then there's others to be able to go through data and spot triggers when it's time to reach somebody, do analysis. So there's a number of different flavors of AI. There's more and more coming. I think the important thing is not to just get Gen AI, you get very easily caught up in the image generation. But again, I think coming back to, and I keep landing on the 5 promises, what's the architecture? What do you need to deliver those? And then thinking about, because there are now AI-powered solutions that can help in almost all of those steps. You got to test them. There's often too many, but a lot of them are pretty open architecture. They can be plugged in with others. And that's going to be something you've got to explore. But you should be looking, and the most successful AI tools, I think, will be the ones that combine different aspects of AI to help companies be able to do several things to get one of those capabilities in place.
Maybe just to build on that, yeah, I really think this important distinction between predictive AI and generative AI is great to clarify some of the confusion. But I think a piece we don't talk about enough is the rules and the brand guardrails that we put around the AI. So really thinking about what are those parameters within which the AI is optimizing. A lot of companies don't have, when you actually look under the hood, the most sophisticated AI machine learning models in place to optimize things like personalized offers or recommendations. A lot of them use rules-based models at the end of the day underneath. And so really understanding how those rules work, not trusting a black box, but something that is designed by marketers, designed with a customer-centric view is so critical.
Yeah, I think the thing that for me, it feels like the underlying one of the underlying themes is that you I go back to something you said earlier around this book has been written for leaders.
Mhm.
And it feels like actually it's incumbent upon them, and using your sort of 5 promises is almost to take a moment and get the creative juices kind of going and start imagining, what does empower me look like? What does it know me look like? What does reach me look like? What does show me and what does delight me look like? Rather than getting stuck in with it, oh, here's a spanner. Where can I find the nut, as it were? And because it sort of fits, maybe this is my, confirmation bias kind of like kicking in, but it's sort of, it strikes me that there's too often do people take a tech and then data and then experience led approach, but actually it's the other way around. You need to start with the experience, but imagine what you want to deliver and how that's going to be. Think about the data you need in order to fulfill that, and then think about the tech you need in order to power all of that. But the experience bit, that's the creativity, that's the imagining kind of bit that leaders need to get on top of, because then actually when it gets down to it, you become a better shopper, because then you know what sort of tools you need to go shopping for. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think personalized, this book is at its heart a corporate strategy book. Companies are now competing on personalization, not economies of scale in manufacturing. It's economies of scale in these digital customer experiences and how quickly they can translate them into better experiences. And so that means every C-suite leader has a role to make that happen around the table. Of course, we've talked about the CTO and the chief data officer and the CMO, but the CFO needs to understand, what are the stage gates? How am I funding this massive investment in data and technology and people? And what KPIs am I holding the teams accountable to? The COO needs to understand, and if calls come into my call center, what data can I glean about issues with my operations that can feed back into this customer service, as we call it. And so every role in the C-suite is critical to making this happen, all the way to the CEO, and they need to set the agenda and the bold ambition for this.
But I think, Mark, that thank you for bringing that up, because you talked about this. I like there's a bit in the book we talk about the customer service C-suite loop, because actually that actually does, I think it's an important element which often gets lost in the whole personalization debate, is the role that service, support, contact centers play in that whole feedback kind of loop, and how often they're not connected. It's sort of over there. It's a bit like a fire department that you don't pay any attention to. There's like fires going on over there. They're like, it's fine. And I think, but it's essential, because that's your real time kind of almost monitoring, listening kind of like station. And if you're not plugging it in, and if it's not plugged into the C-suite, then that's where you're first going to hear about whether your efforts are succeeding or not, right?
Yeah. So, for example, one of the big telecom companies gets a huge surge of people who are moving in June and in August. And they get overloaded with phone calls then, which they can't really handle the capacity. There's lots of challenges in terms of the questions that come up. And so from a CEO standpoint, this is a really critical moment of make or break a relationship, especially if people have a choice of who they can do business with. So they had a team totally focused on, how can we get more information out of the call center? Worked with a company called Data.org to digitize every interaction in that call center, all the conversations, so they could find out at a high level, what are people calling about, and find out about it in real time so they could fix things. But then also find out about individuals and what they were calling about and where they were having problems, and use that as data about the individuals to follow up, make sure these people felt like their service issues were resolved. If those people needed education, sending them an extra video that helps explain how to set up a cable box specifically. Yeah. And so this was a corporate level issue, because it filtered and it connected customer service, operations, marketing. And so they had to take that on as a company overall. So, and now the tools are enabling that to be able to get that data out of the call center and be able to use that in almost real time.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, from their perspective, it also means has big impact on retention if you don't get it right.
Mhm.
So there's big revenue impacts as well.
Yep.
So finally, do you have maybe like one or two examples you think actually from the book that you just go, actually, here are a couple of people. Now you don't need to name them if you can't, but a couple of people you think actually what they're doing is really quite neat. And this is what they're doing, and this is why they're doing it. And like Mark, I mean, let me come to you first. I mean, like, what do you think? Who's the poster child from the book?
Yeah, let me give you a few from the book and beyond too. So one of the highest scoring brands on the personalization index is Spotify. We go into all the details of how they do it. But, the truth is they also don't score 100%. You get great recommendations. They have massive amounts of data calculating each customer's likes and scores and propensities for various genres. But there's also risk to becoming a bit of an echo chamber of just feeding you the things you like. So they're continuing to experiment with things like DJX, which is the Gen AI DJ that actually mines your past history, asks for more real-time feedback and adjusts and explains its choices to you. So I think they're definitely a company that have personalization at their core and continue to innovate. But I think there's a few other elements of this that are important to touch on. And I love brands that just use a personal touch, an actual human touch in the personalization journey as well. And whether it's your local favorite restaurant or a Four Seasons, those are great examples of brands that take personalization and really bring it into a human physical part of the experience as well. Handwritten notes when you come to your room that acknowledge you as a customer, make you feel special, are a great example of this. And then I think what's exciting is this is being applied to whole new domains as well. A company that's actually come out even since the book was written is Atypical.ai, which is a company that's seeking to transform how kids learn and applying Gen AI and AI to education, recognizing that no kid learns the same way and their experience can be personalized. So it's a constantly evolving domain and lots of lessons to learn.
Awesome. David?
And even in areas where you wouldn't think, we haven't talked much about B2B, and there's a lot of opportunity there. So one of my clients is a B2B construction distribution company. So they sell roofing stuff, shingles, all of that. And they realize when a contractor is calling in to try to figure out a roofing solution, that there's a lot of data that has to come together in order to provide a really good recommendation, including things like the local ordinances, all of the information about the specific project, understanding all the possible components and what their capabilities are, transportation, logistics. And so contractors would call into their call center asking, here's my situation. And the reps it would take a lot to pull together. So they've now created an AI engine that can actually give an answer to a contractor of good, better, best solutions that are based on information about also that contractor, what they have tended to buy in the past, where they're located, getting them just to upload the specifications for the particular site, local ordinances, all the warehouse information so they can know when the thing could be delivered, what the pricing is, what are the capabilities, and they can put that all together. And so since doing that, they've been building share. The contractors don't call around as anymore. They're just coming right in. And the reps feel empowered too, because the personalization actually comes to the rep who then gives it. It's not straight to the end customer, but it's a dramatic change in terms of personalization using AI to bring all of that data together.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think about there's a guy I met through my blog and never actually had him on the podcast, but I've written about him a couple of times. And there's a guy called Sheldon Yellen who runs Belfour. Corporation, if you know, they do the disaster recovery construction sort of thing. And I'm a little bit like, yeah, David, you should totally talk to Sheldon. And that, I mean, because I'm sure that would make their life kind of like a lot easier, particularly when it's like, you know, when something kind of bad happens and they have to go in and help fix things, then anything that kind of speeds that up is going to be very, very welcome. So that's super cool. It's great and great to hear. But let's call it quits there on the book, unless there's anything else that we've that you want to highlight that we've missed out. You know, before we can do some wrap up questions. Anything else you want to point out?
Covered a lot.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I really like it. I mean, I think it's a great piece of work, and I like the idea that, particularly about the whole sort of thing around it's targeted at executives, and it's about, as Mark, as you say, it's a more of a strategy kind of piece, because it's about leaning into that. How can we deliver personalization to drive our competitive advantage? But in order to do that, you have to upskill yourself, because a bit like when people talked about, was it 8-10 years ago, people talked about the emergence of big data, and we were talking about we need data analysis and data-driven decision-making leaders and things, and everyone was like using all the words, but not really understanding what it meant. And there was all these big skills gaps. And I think the skills gap is showing up both in kind of the AI domain, but it's also showing up in the personalization domain. So I think this book is a good way of upskilling kind of people to understand what it is they really need to do in order to deliver that personalization that both they as organizations want to deliver, but also their customers are demanding. So I think that's great. So people should totally check it out. And I will put links and stuff in the show notes and all that sort of like stuff. But just going to write into the search bar, personalization, all in caps, but with a Z instead of an S, and you should find it.
Exactly. And look, like the best advice on this is just get going. Like no organization we walk into is short on ideas. They've already got things in the field, but they have lots of next ideas to make the customer experience better. So there's no better way to upskill than bringing a small team together and working cross-functionally on the next big idea.
David, what would be your, I mean, if that's Mark's best advice, like just get going, what would be yours?
Think about what frustrates your customers and what can you do to break the compromises that they're facing. So taking a customer, but what's a big thing? Like for us at Aetna was people don't understand their health insurance.
Right.
So people have ideas, but think about it from a customer's point of view. What would really help them, your customer, see value, and of course, unlock value for yourself along the way.
Perfect. Now, just a couple of wrap-up questions before we kind of end. I mean, we did the your best advice ones, which is a normal one we do. The second one is a punk-rated one, and I want to come to Mark first, because Mark doesn't look old enough to be a proper like an original punk. So I think you might. I mean, we'll see how we kind of takes this one. But what company or brand do you think takes a more punk approach to customer experience, or you think is an experienced kind of leader? They've got it all knitted together. They've got the customer side, they've got the employee side, they've got the brand side. They're singing. It's a harmonious kind of like motion.
Yeah, we haven't talked enough about some of the smaller companies. And what's cool now is you don't have to be a many billion-dollar organization to crack the code on this. So one of the stories we tell is how Sweet Green, which is, a restaurant chain that's off the charts, booming this year now after their IPO a few years ago, didn't exist 20 years ago. And they were built with a digital customer experience, but also the restaurant experience and the great product experience in mind from the start. And I think that's paying dividends now as they really go to scale their concept.
Awesome. Sweet Green. Now, David, I think you're probably more of a vintage.
Yes, I am.
To really understand and possibly to have experienced the whole punk kind of like immersion. So what's your take? Who do you think is, they're punk? I like what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't think this is personalization as such, but I have to say Red Bull has just been an amazing brand in how they basically became a media company off a product that they are.
Doesn't taste very nice.
Yeah. And what that product does, I mean, everything brings out what that product is about. And yet at the same time, they have a sports and media empire all built off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Just the creativity to take that and to invest and create, a whole massive franchise off of that. So I think from a punk perspective, taking a caffeinated drink and turning it into a media empire, a legitimate media empire is pretty punk.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure that Red Bull's never been mentioned on the podcast before, and that's probably a bit of an oversight. But no, absolutely. I'm not a fan of the of the drinks, but what they've done is
same here.
Nothing short of incredible.
Yeah.
So, final question to both of you before we kind of wrap up, because let's put it this way: we live in interesting times, shall we say? And every morning, I try not to doom scroll, but sometimes it feels inevitable. And so, what I've been trying to do recently on the podcast is ask people to share with me a good news story that they've seen or heard in the last week. But you've just gone, "That's cool," or "That's made me smile," or you've gone, "Ah, that's nice." So, Mark, let me come to you first. Give me a good news story so we can end on a high note.
I'll give a counterintuitive answer to your question. So my friend texted me. He's involved as one of the investors in XAI as they build the world's most powerful supercomputer, which probably scares a lot of people out there. But I'm hopeful for humanity if we can continue to keep the customer experience front and foremost. And I think we sometimes overestimate how quickly technology will change us, but we underestimate all the ways that it can create brand new business models, innovation, new service models, and we get to shape that. So let's go.
Nice. Now, David?
Adrian, I'm going to come up with something that your punk roots will appreciate. I heard that Oasis is reuniting and going on tour. And
there you go.
I've got to catch that, whether it's in London or if they come to the States. I've been a longtime fan, and I thought that was great news.
Fantastic. What a great story. That's just kind of came out today. Well, the day of recording, which is the 27th of August, but this will come out on the 15th. But it was, it's all over the news. Liam and Noel have put their differences aside and have announced this big kind of tour. UK dates only right now, but I think they're going to go around the world at some point. Yeah. But that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. And so just want to say congratulations. Well, thank you for all the work that you do on personalization and helping kind of brands and different companies kind of lean into all this sort of stuff and produce better outcomes. Congratulations on the book. I thought it was a great read. There's some really fantastic stuff in there. It's going to be really useful. I would encourage people to check it out. I know how much effort it takes to do these things. So yes, I'd doff my cap to you. But also finally, just thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your expertise with me today. That's been awesome.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.